If you've ever seen a naval warfare movie that takes place far back in time as like Master and Commander and up to and including today's modern naval warfare movies, then you've probably heard of a lot of classifications of ships. Man of war, ships of the line, frigate, cruisers. What are they and what's the difference? Some you can tell right away, like no one's really going to mistake seeing an aircraft carrier. But what's the difference between, like, say, a frigate and a destroyer? So let's start with frigates and destroyers. Now, a lot of navies kind of actually almost use that term interchangeably, but in the United States, there is a difference between a frigate and a destroyer. Now, a frigate is probably the most historically important classification of ship to the United States Navy. The first 6 ships even commissioned to be built for the U.S. Navy were frigates. Although, much like we have done through all our history, we couldn't just build frigates. We had to inject 15 screaming eagles into each of them and make super frigates. Now, a frigate, traditionally at the time, was a smaller ship, a little lower to the waterline, still had a gun deck on it, but was cheaper, smaller, and faster than ships of the line that they were using as the big boys in the navies at the time. So they were kind of designed to like scout ahead, get ahead of people, or follow along like merchant ships that could go faster than like a fully decked out warship. So that was like the traditional thinking at the time. However, when it came to designing our ships, we had the most American problem ever. How do we put more guns on it? See, you kind of run into a problem with the original frigate design. The longer you make that keel, the center spine of the ship that kind of holds it all together, and the more weight you start putting on the outside edges of that keel, starts to bow the keel, and you can risk making the superstructure of that ship weaker. But America found out how to get around that problem. We decided to re-engineer it a little bit. So some more support columns were added on the inside of the ship to even out the weight load to the outer edges of the hull. And then on the fore and aft ends of the ship, instead of just having a keel and, the regular cross sections that go across the keel that form the hull of the ship on what the deck plating and the armor on the outside will go, the skin of the ship, they started adding cross beams down on the inside. Now this allowed the weight on the fore and aft ends of the ship to be sent more centerline and even out the weight load, therefore allowing us to put more guns. Now, mind you, when they did this, and we sent out our first 6 warships of our tiny new little navy out of this brand new country, we were kind of laughed at by England, who, for the longest time, had seen themselves, and honestly were, the greatest naval force in history. How could these 6 redesigned ships ever compete with them? Now, in a few small skirmishes, and then the War of 1812, we'd send England home with a big old black eye on that one. Like, they didn't even want to give us acknowledgement for beating them, because they viewed our design against the traditional design of frigates and liked to call it cheating. In fact, the longest active duty naval warship is the USS Constitution. The original USS Constitution. It's still kept, maintained, and is, for all intents and purposes, an active duty warship. You can even still serve on it. It is a special duty assignment. You actually don't wear the modern age uniform. You still wear the uniform of the time period when you serve on that ship. So if you're ever up in Boston, which is where I believe it's homeported, you can check out the USS Constitution. Now, frigates disappeared in the 1800s, so they didn't build them for a while. And then World War II happened, and the United States just happened to need to build a lot of ships. And it was still cheaper to build a smaller, slightly narrower ship with less material than it was to put out a bunch of destroyers or cruisers. So they brought the frigate back. However, in about the 2010s, they put the frigate back to bed. So as of right now, even though there's been talk of trying to bring that ship back due to, once again, costs have prevented it this time from coming back. So they're going back and forth on it, on whether they want to bring the frigate classification back or not. But as of right now, there's no new frigates being built, so the ones that are out will probably be the last line of frigates for the United States Navy. Now, the destroyer type of ship is a more modern invention in terms of it kind of came outside of the age of sail as we started getting to the industrial age, because they started to make something called a torpedo. And when it came to needing to defend against the torpedo and the torpedo boats that would launch them, smaller, faster ships that could get in there, launch torpedoes, and leave, they needed something to hunt them down. So the torpedo boat destroyer got made, eventually just shortened down to destroyer. And originally, that was the destroyer's whole purpose, was to hunt down torpedo boats. But quickly over time, it became more of a defensive ship for the strike group, where the frigate would go out and harass, using its speed to get ahead of everybody and attack other ships and swing back in. The destroyers were there to protect the strike group and knock down any threats coming in towards the rest of the ships. Now, the destroyers pretty much held that job up into the modern age, though nowadays you're not really restricted to just like one specific job or task. You can like re-kit out a ship if you need something that's going to, do anti-submarine warfare, ASW work, or if a ship's going to be what's called Alpha Whiskey Air Warfare Commander for the strike group. You're not really held to that one position. Things can be bounced around a lot more than they used to be because we built our ships to be more capable and able to do different platforms, to be re-kitted out to handle whatever task is needed at that time. So destroyers and frigates have both kind of cemented their place in U.S. naval history as being rather important ships. It is kind of sad to see the frigates go, even though I've always called them bath toys because, man, those things get thrown around in rough seas. But it is sad to see them go, and I hope that whatever replaces them actually works and doesn't fall apart every single time you take it out to sea.